the thing up yet. That would help. 21. Yeah. Okay. So, as a reminder for everybody, final paper is due on Wednesday. So if you're going to do that, make sure you get that in. And that includes for my online folks, although I do have a few that have already been sent to me, so that's helpful. Got your page, your test. Right, so final paper Wednesday. We do still have a class next Monday, which will be our review day. And then the final is, I meant to pull that before we got started. Did I start the stream? I did start the stream. Okay, cool. Let me just go ahead and pull this out of the trash. Let's open that. There we go. For us, it will be Wednesday, April 29th. So next Wednesday. In here at 8:30. So for us, it's just going to be a regular day, pretty much. Granted, you will have an extra, well, really 45 minutes. You'll have until 10:30 to do it. You're not going to need that much time, but you'll have that much time. It's just going to, like I said, it's just going to be like another test. It's not going to be any different in terms of really anything, size or how much it's going to be worth. Just being here next Wednesday. And then, of course, for my online students, oops, let me not do that. For my online students, I will put the test up next Monday, and you'll have a week to do it. And then once that's over, that's over. I can't extend it because I got to get the grades in, and that's it. Any questions about anything before we try to get as much notes as I can get on today? Okay, cool. One final thing before we get into the notes. Next Tuesday is reading day. On the main campus, that's usually when the students are all hanging out in the library and panic studying for last minute stuff. I like to do a voluntary movie day / extra credit day. If you guys want to do it, I'll be here. So Tuesday, I will be next Tuesday, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's just more class. Next Tuesday, I will be in here from 8:30 to like 11, the whole 2 class periods. And we'll be watching 2 Cold War era movies. One, just because I'm not going to be able to get to Cold War notes, and I like to talk about that stuff and at least give you guys some of that information. But also, if you come in, you get some extra credit. If you come in for the first one, which will be, I don't know if I'm going to do Dr. Strangelove first or Atomic Cafe first. There's going to be Dr. Strangelove and Atomic Cafe. Either way, if you come in for one, you'll get 2 points. If you come in for both of them, you'll get 5 points. So if you come in for only one of them, I'll give you 2. If you come in for both, you'll get the 2 points for each, and then I'll give you just an extra point for being there for both. There'll be a sign-in sheet, so I'll know who's here and who's not. Obviously, this is more for my in-person students, but I guess if my online people show up, cool. But yeah, this is just some extra credit I'll toss on your final. Just just because you showed up for extra stuff. Um, that's it. That's all I've got. Where did my thing go? Here we go. Okay. Right. So we talked about the wages and prosperity and all of that last time. With this wage gap increasing where the rich were getting richer and the people at the bottom were increasing in number, where, the top, let's see, what do we have? 1% of families had the greater income than 42% at the bottom, which is actually less of a wage gap than we have today, interestingly enough. Which is actually worse for the economy because, as I said last time, when you have 1% of people who have half of the economy, they can only buy so much. Like, they spend most of their money on, like, super yachts and, like, in these, stock investment and real estate speculation, stuff that doesn't directly help the economy and oftentimes will hurt the economy when these things fall through. And then, of course, we have the Dawes Act. Where's it at? Yeah, the Dawes Act. Or Dawes Plan, not Dawes Act. The Dawes Act was last semester about the Native American land. This Dawes Plan that was meant to help Germany, which would then allow Germany to repay its loans to the Allies, well, not loans, but war indemnities to the Allies, which would then allow the Allies to repay their war debt to the U.S. However, that was assuming that the U.S. maintained its economic prosperity, which, is totally going to happen. Everything's totally fine forever. Right. So the Roaring Twenties was more than just economic shift. There was a change in morality, as it were, because again, we're really breaking from the old 19th century, and as my professor liked to say, the 19th century didn't really end until 1918. You see in like the early 1900s and really honestly up to 1914 and even into the World War I, there was still a lot of 1800s ideals and mindset and whatnot. And after World War I, that's kind of when things started to change. That was the start cutoff. So, especially in the United States, new moral ideas came about, due in part to the entertainment industry, which was flourishing in the 1920s, largely centered around Hollywood, which I'll get more into in a little bit. The idea of the new woman came about, dressing as flappers, short skirts, and by short skirts I mean they're showing their, like, shins. Ooh. Ample makeup, smoking cigarettes in public, drinking alcohol, which was still technically illegal, dancing to jazz on the dance floor, just really terrible stuff. Now, of course, this wasn't all complete debauchery. Families could still enjoy entertainment while maintaining their traditional values. By 1929, 40% of households had a radio or could at least listen to, or owned a radio and could listen to stations affiliated with the two major broadcast companies. So there were two broadcast companies, pretty much. The Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, and the National Broadcasting Company, NBC. So CBS and NBC have existed for as long as we've had radios, at least here in the U.S. We had advertising, racial stereotypes, for entertainment, foreign language channels. So there was a lot going on in the early days of the radio. I guess I should also mention real quick, in the early days of the radio, which is to say before even World War I was over, there was a lot of like amateur radio stations. As long as you could build a transceiver, you could have your own radio station. Unfortunately, there was no real regulation to the bandwidth, and people could very easily get onto military bands. And there was a lot of people like accidentally switching on to stations where you could hear like military commands and stuff. So they had to fix that. They had to restrict like what you could access. And then eventually it's much more restrictive what you can actually do as a private radio station. There are, of course, intellectual challenges. A group called the Lost Generation that were disillusioned by the First World War. This was largely European, but especially because, you see, we weren't that exposed to what happened in World War I. We were there for almost a year, and especially the soldiers that went over certainly experienced it. But, Europe was largely destroyed by World War I. It's hard to really put into words how devastating World War I was for Europe. The scholars of the day discredited racial notions, challenging the idea that whites were inherently superior over blacks. They owed this intellectual development to environmental factors because, if you have a society that makes certain groups of people live in the slums where they're struggling to survive every day, and then this other group is allowed to go and get an education, then surely one group's going to be better educated. That's just how it works. And then, of course, you had fellows like Sigmund Freud, with his ideas of the subconscious, which, again, we're not going to get too much into, because while his ideas definitely set the ground for a lot of stuff with psychology, it's mostly been discredited. But it did at least get the ball rolling. He had a lot going on. And a lot of that was the opium, which at the time was still extremely legal and widespread. So, real quick note on Hollywood. It was called Hollywoodland at the start. The Hollywood sign has been defaced many, many times over the years. And at one point, the letters were just pushed down the hill. And they decided to not bother bringing those back up. So that's why it's just called Hollywood now. That's literally what happened is it was another prank where the sign was messed up and they just decided not to fix that part. So that's why it's Hollywood now instead of Hollywoodland. Also, anyone want to hazard a guess as to why because it was around this time that Hollywood became the center of where movies were being produced. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to why this place in California became the center of movie production? And this picture does kind of help. That's part of it because a lot of the movies at the time were westerns, so they could literally just go outside. Kind of. Uh, that's part of it for sure. I'll give you a hint. Before this point, it was in like indoor studios in New York City. How would that compare to what you're seeing here in California? Now, don't think of modern day Hollywood, California. Just look at this. Well, not so much the vehicles, but if you know anything about the area around Hollywood slash Los Angeles, once you get outside of the city, it's scrubland. I mean, not too much further past that, it's the desert. Um, the land out there was worthless. It was literally you could buy acres and acres of land for pennies. So the reason Hollywood became a thing is the land out there was so cheap they could buy a bunch of land and use it for making these movies for really, really cheap. But because that was where all the movie studios were going, everyone went there, and then it became what it is today, which is the opposite of why they went there. Now it's extremely expensive. But before, it was in these little tiny studios in New York, which was already congested from like a century before, and that was extremely expensive. So at least with this, they've got a lot more room. So yeah, it was literally because it was cheaper, which is weird to think of for Hollywood, but that's why they went there. That's why so many movies today are shot in like Alberta, Canada, and whatnot, because it's still a lot of wilderness. So here we have the new woman, as the 1920s would portray. Very Captain Morgan stance here. I think I've got, this is the flapper dress, which again, short skirts. Oh no, we can see their shins. Yeah, this was the style of the day. Again, oh no, it's below the knee. How scandalous. I think I've also got, yeah, again, that was the norm. And, this was considered highly sexualized bathing suits of the day. There's literally images of women getting, like, arrested for wearing this on the beach. And there's radio. Main reason I've got this picture is my grandmother had one of these as well. Granted, by the time I was old enough to be up and moving, they had gutted this because the bits inside had fallen apart. But they still had this old piece of furniture, because the electronics back in the day were furniture as much as they were electronics. So it's something I'll always remember. And there we have the family sitting around. This is something that'll be, if you guys show up for the movies, the Atomic Cafe, where everybody goes to sit down around the radio, and they're all wearing like they've just got out of church. They've got their suits and ties, and the women have their dresses on and their nice little shoes. It's like, why are you wearing this in your own living room? What psychopath wears nice, like, again, Sunday clothes in their own living room? That's insane. Anyway, so yeah, radio stations, CBS, NBC. Also, this was a really common thing in the early days of radio and also television, where the logos would have like a lightning bolt shooting off of them because they were using electricity, and that was like the space age technology of the day. So it was like lightning bolts, and we're using electricity to transmit these waves everywhere. The Lost Generation. This is in Paris because that was typically where these people would congregate. I particularly like this image because while it's obviously people sitting to get their portrait taken, clearly someone has said something, and a lot of them are laughing and kind of having a good time, and it's more human. It's another photograph where people are just being people, and it's nice to see that in an image that is 100 years old at this point. And then another one here. This is also a cafe in Paris. Again, people just kind of in the middle of living their lives. And there, of course, is Sigmund Freud. We're not going to worry about him too much. All right. Speaking of people fighting back against the... oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I think I got ahead of myself. Were we this far? Oh, I need to check something. I might have gotten on my 102 course. That's slightly embarrassing. Hold on a minute. Where's my... Okay. We did do the Red Scare. And we only got to the Red Scare. Okay, I am ahead of... I'm ahead of where we were. We gotta go back. Whoops. All right, 1 second. I knew we had missed something. Yeah. Okay. Jeez. All right. We talked about the Red Scare last time. I'd gotten ahead of myself. I got this one in my other course mixed up. That's okay. We'll just skip the part that we've already gone over when we get there. Okay, so because we did talk about this, the economic problems due to the end of World War I, which led people to think, oh no, the communists are out to get us, even if it was, capitalism working as intended. Let's see. This affected steel, transportation, and shipbuilding. Policemen went on strike in Boston, which resulted in looting and violence. Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge, who becomes president eventually, sent in the National Guard to break the strike and restore order. Obviously, these newspapers that were working to sell more copies exaggerated the role that communists had in these events, as there were not a whole lot of socialists or communists to go around. But there were enough involved that, again, these politicians that wanted to use it to their advantage definitely could. And again, if you're here for the movies on Tuesday next week, that'll be part of the Atomic Cafe. There was enough trouble that there was a little bit of concern. May 1st, 1919, 30 incendiary devices were sent through the mail, but these were disarmed. However, in the next month, bombs exploded in 8 cities, including on the doorstep of A. Mitchell Palmer. He was uninjured, but this did lead to an anti-communist crusade. These Palmer raids, as they were known, again, were McCarthyism before McCarthy. This was, again, if you're familiar at all with the 1950s and 60s, with the like anti-communist fervor of the day, and McCarthy's just like persecution of anyone who was maybe communist. This is that, but earlier. They typically targeted immigrants. They arrested and held without legal counsel thousands of people. Only 556 were actually deported, and even of those, there were very little that actually had any kind of solid evidence. So, despite, which I'll show you guys in just a minute, a lot of images, all this concern of, oh, we've got all this evidence of these communists that are infiltrating our country and blah, 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 and them arresting all these people without legal counsel, which is illegal, they never really actually found evidence of anything. What a surprise. So here are the big strikes. Please vote to strike tonight. And here's the National Guard going in to break the strike. And I guess this again was back when the police wore those big dumb hats like they're freaking London bobbies. And it's the striking policeman is the ally of crime, etc. Here we have just crime in general. I'm still on duty, will not go out in sympathy with striking policemen, so even crime is still on duty. One of the few loyal policemen on guard in Boston during the Reign of Terror, which, again, like, kind of dramatic. I mean, sure, there was looting and violence, yada yada, but, like, Boston was occupied by the British during the Revolutionary War for, like, years. I feel like they can handle a little bit of glass being broken. Oh, it's the Reign of Terror. It's like, come on, guys, you're Bostonians. You should be able to handle this. So there was, of course, a lot of anti-union rhetoric. There's always a lot of anti-union rhetoric. Stop before it's too late. This one isn't even, I thought before this was another, like, police strike thing. This isn't even police strikes. This is, let's see, where's it at? The strike has ever been without support of the public, yada, yada, yada. Where does it say? It's just talking about union strikes, yeah. And of course, some of the, well, I guess this would be in Boston, so, you know, turnover cars, which, I mean, this is just any day in Philadelphia. There's Palmer and his house after the bomb went off, which his house was, he was rich, so his house was really pretty well built. I mean, the facade isn't even messed up. The windows were busted out. But, I mean, unless you were standing in front of the window when the bomb went off, you're fine. He wasn't hurt. It doesn't say that anybody in the home was hurt, so he's all right. And these are, now, initially, when I pulled this, it was some of the socialist offices that were raided because, you know, oh, we think that might be communist sympathizers that are trying to take over the country. And then I noticed, written in white, which is a great thing to write something in when it's a black and white image, it's an IWW office. the industrial workers of the world. It's a union office that they ransacked without warrant, without reason, just, hey, we think they might be a danger to the country, so we're going to just ransack the office. Police searching a group of arrested, quote, suspects in police headquarters in Chicago. Again, no warrants, no reason to actually arrest them, just, hey, they're immigrants, so therefore they might be dangerous. Let's arrest them. Again, you legally can't do that. Here we have perfect cases against 2,613 of 4,500 persons arrested in nationwide radical raids. Again, the book mentions a little over 500 were actually deported, and even of those 500, most of them didn't even have substantial cases to be deported. So this is an incorrect statement. What a surprise. We're getting lied to. So, initially, Americans were supportive of this because, I mean, it doesn't take much for Americans to give up their freedoms because we're scared. Look at the Patriot Act. But they soon saw that these heavy-handed tactics were more dangerous to American freedoms than any so-called communists that were maybe there. So we had a group of pacifists, progressives, and constitutional lawyers that formed the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, which is still very busy and active today. They monitored government actions that violated the Bill of Rights. So while the Palmer raids did end, and again, this was, well before World War II and the eventual McCarthyism, there were more actions like J. Edgar Hoover's use of the Bureau of Investigation to spy on Americans because, hey, look, Hoover's back, and he's using the FBI to spy on people. They remained busy trying to keep the government from overreaching. And imagine, back then, the idea of the FBI spying on Americans was something that people protested against. And now it's just like, we just assume the government's spying on us. Because they are. And because it was put into law that they just can. We just let that happen. However, worse than all of this was a medical crisis that came about at the end of the Great War. In 1918, an influenza pandemic spread across the globe. This infected 20% of the American population, killed about 675,000 people. Obviously, infants and the elderly died most quickly, but even able-bodied men and women were not safe. Between 50 and 100 million people died worldwide, and it didn't really end until 1920. We didn't have any kind of vaccines or way to fight it, so we just sort of had to wait until it went away. This was really bad. This was what we commonly know as the Spanish flu. It started showing up as the war was ending, but the war wasn't over yet. But none of the people actually fighting in the war wanted to admit it was happening because we were still sending people to the war front. So Spain was the first country to actually report on it because Spain was a neutral country, and it became known as the Spanish flu because, like, oh, Spain was the first to report on it. They must be the first country to see it happening. But it was very quickly discovered that it probably came from, like, Arkansas near a military base and infected the soldiers there, and then we sent the soldiers over to Europe, and it spread like wildfire. And it was, again, really, really bad. Like, there were reports of, like, soldiers loading up in a train car, seemingly completely healthy, the train leaving and then arriving wherever it was arriving hours later, and the train car is being full of dead bodies. Like, it was extremely bad. Entire islands in the Pacific were just wiped out. Um, this is the reason why today a lot of Eastern Asian nations, like Japan especially, if you so much as have like a sniffle, it's culturally a thing to like wear a face mask, because you don't need to spread it to other people, because they remember 100 years ago people were dropping like flies in the middle of the street. So yeah, and also I remember back when I was first teaching this, and I had a bit more time. For some reason, it seemed like the semester didn't go by as quickly as it's going by here. I would show a little video on it, and at the end of the video, they would say, it seems like these types of epidemics happen every 100 years or so, and we're overdue for our next one. And this was in like 2014, 2015 when I showed this. Yeah, they were pretty close. They were pretty close. Anyway, more anti-Bolshevism, organized worker carrying the unorganized worker on his back. Because again, like, most of us, especially here in South Carolina, because it's very difficult to be in a union in South Carolina, most of us aren't in unions, but any kind of like workers' rights we have are because of unions. 8-hour workday, overtime pay, workman's comp, vacation time, any of that, that's all from labor unions. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh yeah, so there is Hoover, now in the FBI. And I remember I was putting this together, and one of the professors I was working with when I was teaching upstate was like, "Oh, do you have the picture of Hoover with the Tommy gun?" Like, no, I don't. And so he sent me this. So now here's Hoover with the Tommy gun. Anyway, again, looking back to the Spanish flu, 1918 influenza pandemic, very familiar of very just immediately running out of hospital beds, having to just convert anything into hospital beds. I remember distinctly, because I live right beside, it used to be Caroline's Hospital, it's MUSC now, in Florence. And like, they had little mobile hospital tents in the parking lot when COVID hit, because they were out of hospital beds. And by the time I caught it and was unable to breathe, they were like, yeah, unless you're actively dying, you have to stay home, because we don't have room. So yeah, that was fun. So here's now this is an older map, so it's probably not as accurate as perhaps more modern studies would be. But this is sort of showing the approximate beginning of the spread. But as you can see, it's not necessarily the ports. It didn't come from outside. It started, I keep forgetting this is an online class. It started from within and then was spread outside, and then it came back. So, yeah. Use your handkerchief and do your bit to protect me, because, if you're sick and you're spreading it, if you keep yourself from spreading it, you're helping to protect the public, which, apparently is something offensive to people these days. How dare you ask me to not get other people sick? All theaters closed until further notice. So even though at this point germ theory was really in its infancy, people understood, actually I think that's the next one. Yeah, people understood the basics of how this stuff will spread. Cough and sneeze spreads disease. Through eye contact, avoid crowds, possible walk to work. This is in lieu of like public transit, because most people didn't have their own vehicles. Do not spit on the floor or sidewalk, because that was real common. Common drinking cups, etc., etc. So yeah, don't. If you're sick, try not to cough on people, and don't be in crowds. Like, that's the basic. Here we have Spanish influenza has endangered the prosecution of the war in Europe. There are 1,500 cases in the Navy Yard. 30 deaths have already resulted. Spitting spreads Spanish influenza. Don't spit. So again, people were just like spitting on the ground. And then this one's just a really great thing on the back of a trolley. Just spit spreads death. All right. That's real simple. And here's the dude that was shot in the arm and leg because he refused to don an influenza mask, and then just like starts approaching the officer, and the dude, the cop shoots the guy. Yeah. It was a heck of a thing. So, things get worse. Between 1917 and 1918, 400,000 African Americans left the South for industrial jobs in the North, and also to escape racial discrimination and poverty in the South, because, obviously. By 1930, another 800,000 had moved to the North, so there was a pretty large migration. This became known as the Great Exodus. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender told of great opportunities in the North, which led to some 70,000 African Americans moving to Chicago alone. And during the First World War, many African Americans had been taking jobs in heavy industry, which was going to pay a lot better than farming jobs, which aren't going to make you much money. Especially sharecropping, which is just made to keep you in poverty. However, the North was not this utopia of freedom and equality. Also, white migrants from the South were also heading to the North for these same industrial cities and industrial jobs, and competed with the black Americans for the said jobs, which resulted in race riots erupting across 25 cities in 1919. The worst of these happened in Chicago in July, in what the poet James Johnson called Red Summer. The book just says a black... Let's see, does the book actually say this? Or is this a... Okay, I did go a bit too far back. Okay, a black youth, so like a boy, a young boy, crossed over to the, quote, white side of the beach, and the swimmers there decided to respond by throwing rocks at him, which, of course, struck him in the head, causing him to drown. This resulted in a 13-day riot, which killed 15 whites and 23 blacks, injuring 178 whites and 342 blacks, and also left thousands of black Americans homeless because their homes and businesses were torched. Because, well, the authorities tend to be on one side, and it's pretty obvious whose side they're working with. So before we get to that, here is the Great Migration. Again, largely just moving directly north. So you've got the East Coast moving to the East Coast, just to the north, and the Midwest. But also you have these groups here that are already kind of in the Midwest. Some are moving north, but some are heading west to California, you can actually see here many of the exodusters eventually left Kansas and Oklahoma for California. And if you remember, the exodusters we talked about way at the start of the semester who had been making their way west post-Civil War to, get out of the Southeast, but had stopped kind of in this region because this wasn't settled to begin with. This area wasn't settled and wasn't part of America yet. But they had settled here, and now with this great migration, some of them headed north, but a lot of them continued westward and settled in California. So that's kind of neat. The exodusters are back and have, in a way, completed their exodus. So that's kind of neat. Here we have another map of just sort of the overall concentration and then the overall major routes. Again, largely to the bigger cities because that's where all the heavy industry is. Here we have the reason for the exodus. And as you can see, the southern hospitality, not quite to one's liking. So yeah, let's head north. Let's leave. Of course, once you get to the north, it's not exactly that that welcoming because you have stuff like this. Perhaps not. Still not as bad as we're going to murder you, but still not exactly welcoming. Though, of course, there were still these race riots. Burned clubbed to death in the St. Louis Race War. Major race riots and lynchings during the Red Summer. And now these are major, so of course there were other, probably more individual cases, but these are like the larger, like citywide cases. Obviously there were 7 in Georgia, surprisingly only 1 in South Carolina, but then again we only had like 1 city at the time. Columbia didn't really exist yet. I mean, it existed, but it wasn't really a city. It was just kind of there. So a lot of these would start with people being just pulled off of public transit, beaten in the streets. You would have stuff like this where just these incendiary statements were made to give people an excuse for this violence. It's, oh, hey, they're going to kill all the whites, so we got to fight back, even though obviously nothing has started. And also, like, the majority of the population would be white in these cities, so, like, this obviously wouldn't be a thing. But, hey, they need the slimmest excuse to be violently racist. So you would have, things like this where they would just pack the streets and turn over cars. And I think this was the one where, it was either this one or the one with the bus, where I said they look like those pasty white Charlottesville motherfuckers, where they've got their little polo shirts and khakis on and their little parts in their hair. Like they haven't changed in 100 years. Not either in mindset or appearance. Let's see, this is the one in Chicago. When colored boy invades white district. Okay, sure, yeah, he's swimming out in the water. There's not exactly a line. But apparently he crossed enough of a line that they decided to murder him. And it caused this this riot, and police shot into the mob because, police are good at that. Now, this was about as progressive as things got as far as white rioters were concerned. That both sides were to blame. And, I'm not going to pretend that, certainly the African Americans that had been mistreated for several centuries were certainly angry about the further mistreatment, but they were not in a place to plan for insurrection. But this is at least not being like some of the earlier magazines or the earlier newspapers were like, oh, look at these violent savages. It's like, and yet, when they'll have the death toll to be like, there were 3 times as many black people killed, but they're still blaming the black people for the violence. Okay, sure. But again, this at least like both sides thing is as progressive as you could get at this time. Now, that said, while this was what you would see as far as the political cartoons of the day, what was actually happening, and this next image that I'm going to show you guys is probably one of the toughest images I've got. What actually happened was much more one-sided. We all have heard of lynchings, racially motivated violence, racially motivated killing. But it's a lot uglier than that. It's really ugly. And, well, all I can do is show it to you. So, last warning, it's rough. They burned a man alive in the middle of the street. And almost worse than the act itself is the fact that you've got all these guys back here standing around like leaning in to take the picture. They're proud of it. It's like they've just been hunting and they're standing around the deer. You've got this child here, like he's clearly standing up on his toes so he can see the burning body. But because they've been so desensitized, they've been so brainwashed in this racism, this isn't a human to them. This is what lynching looks like. This is what these race riots look like. We can say the words all day long, but this is what it looks like. And it's the sort of thing that today's government wants to erase. That sort of thing never happened. Don't worry about it. It doesn't exist. But we can't ignore the suffering of people in the past because there's people today that want that to continue. So, yeah. I just got to get that out there. This is a college course. I can't just sweep that under the rug. Okay. We still do have time, so let's get kind of back to where we were when I tried to start the class. The economy, which is far less interesting, but at least less dire. So, even though the economy was in bad shape after the First World War, well, at least not bad shape, but there was the turmoil of it did have to shift back. We were still doing really well. Between 1922 and 1927, the economy grew by 7% a year, which was the largest peacetime rate up to that point. And actually, that's part of the reason why we've been at war basically since 1980, because the economy grows better during wartime because of our big industries. We have a military-industrial complex, and it's a problem. So the government began allying itself with big businesses, which further stimulated economic growth, which attributed to, the book says, the Second Industrial Revolution. That annoys me horribly because the Second Industrial Revolution happened in the 1800s, but whatever. Warren G. Harding became president. He's super unimportant. He said his party wanted less government in business and more business in government. Boy, that sounds great, doesn't it? Having businesses run the government, that could never go wrong. Under Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, he lowered taxes on the wealthy, thinking it would allow them to expand production and thus create more jobs. Because everyone knows if the rich pay less taxes, they will spend that money on helping people who make less money. Everyone knows that. They certainly won't send their money to offshore tax havens or buy mega yachts. They'll use it to give more people jobs. Hey, look, Herbert Hoover's back again, and now he's Secretary of Commerce. He worked to weaken unions because he's an evil bastard. Encouraging voluntary cooperation between the government and businesses. This American plan established health insurance and pension plans, which pulled importance away from unions. This is why today you get your insurance through your job, basically. And if you don't have a job or you're not working full-time, you have to pay out the nose for insurance, and that's why one of the reasons why insurance is so screwed up, because of Herbert Hoover. Thank you, Herbert Hoover. Of course, though, all this collusion led to corruption. Lots of scandals, but the big one they talk about was this Teapot Dome scandal. Government officials gave out land to the Mammoth Oil Company for under-the-counter cash, which is to say there was land in the Teapot Dome National Park that had oil in it, and they gave money to the Mammoth Oil Company for money. And, that's a scandal back then, but today the government's just doing it out in the open. It's like, hey, big companies want to give us money, we'll give you land that should be preserved for future generations, but instead we're just going to give it to you. And we're going to tell everyone, because we don't care. Anyway, there's Harding. No one cares about Warren G. Harding. There's Mellon. No one really cares about Mellon. There's Hoover again. He's starting to fill out. He's going to be president eventually. The idea is that American prosperity is going to help us beat the commies. Again, this is before, the Cold War. We've been terribly afraid of the communists since 1916. Actually, before that, we've been terrified of the communists since before the communists were established. Freedom of religion and speech, opportunity, private enterprise, representative democracy, all these things that can easily be taken away when the government feels like it. And here we have the threat and intimidation as practiced under the closed shop, which is to say labor unions. Because, labor unions offering insurance and pension payments is definitely threat and intimidation. And it was so much better when your business can threaten you to take away your insurance if they fire you, because that's what businesses do now. And especially in certain states, like South Carolina, at their, what is it? Work at will, whatever it's called. They can fire you for any reason. They don't need to give a reason to fire you. So then your insurance is gone. So if you get fired and you pull out of the parking lot and get smashed by an 18-wheeler, sucks for you. You don't have insurance anymore. Anyway, Teapot Dome oil scandal. I like it because they really like to use the whole teapot thing. All right, let's get a little further because we're literally like this slide before where I started us on. Averaging purchasing power went up about 20%, which is important. It's not that people were making 20% more than they were. It's that their average income is 20% more than than the cost of living, which is great, and things that we can't relate to today because the average minimum wage is what it was like 20 years ago, and the cost of living keeps going up. However, back then, with the increasing technology, this caused prices to drop and wages to go up, which meant people could afford more. The most important thing was the assembly line. Okay, real quick. Henry Ford did not invent the car. If you say Henry Ford invented the car, you're wrong. I will take extra points off if you say Henry Ford invented the car. He also did not invent the assembly line. That's been around for a while. What he did do was he took the idea of the assembly line, applied it to making automobiles, and made it run better. Which meant that once this was perfected, there was a new automobile coming out of Ford's factories every minute. Before, automobiles were built basically by hand, one at a time, so they were extremely expensive. And also almost impossible to get spare parts for because they were built one at a time and were kind of like individual pieces. This so-called Second Industrial Revolution wasn't just automobiles, but mass production entirely. These so-called luxury goods, which is to say just the basic stuff you would think of having in a house. So you have electricity, these time-saving products like refrigerators, toasters, vacuum cleaners, radios, etc. became more accessible, so more people had them. They had access to them, so more people had them. So we're getting closer to what you would think of as, the more modern day, I guess. The automobile is still the most important product of the era. Sales went from 1.5 million to 5 million in the 1920s. This allowed for commutes to work, long-distance vacations, even changed the way courtship unfolded, because before, dating would be the guy going to the woman's house. Typically, she was still living with her parents, so they would just sit in the front room with the parents, watching them the entire time, and they would just sort of awkwardly have a conversation. With this, they could leave and go somewhere else and have their date. And also, when wages weren't enough, because, they're still trying to get by, there were new systems of credit where you could buy now and pay later, because that won't be a problem ever. So you've got assembly lines. This is the engines. I think this is definitely a Model T, because you still got these big, bicycle tires. This is clearly not a Ford factory, but still, same idea. Assembly line where they're just making them and going forward to the next step. And then, of course, these mass-produced furnishings. Every little thing. This refrigerator is actually a kind my grandmother has. She has since passed, but the refrigerator is still kicking. She called it the Coolidge, nicknamed after President Calvin Coolidge. The refrigeration unit is that bit on top. The walls are like that thick, so there's not a lot of room in it, but it still works. It's sitting out on my parents' back porch and has beer in it. So it does this job. There's an old Model T. What else do we have? Oh, this is if you go to Biltmore, this is the car that it wasn't Cornelius Vanderbilt. I think it was his son that constructed Biltmore. Anyway, his wife had a car of her own. You know, most people with these rich assholes, if they had a car, they had a driver for them. They rode in the back and they had a chauffeur. She wanted her own car, so she drove around in this, and they kept it and preserved it. So this was Lady Vanderbilt's car. All right, and then that leads to the next one where we started, so in S945. So we're done. We'll try to finish. Well, we'll finish the chapter on Wednesday because we kind of have to. Yeah, so I'll see y'all Wednesday. Sorry for kind of getting turned around there, but we'll get it. We'll get it figured out.